What is up, everybody? Purple and Gold Podcast, Tuesday, April 14th. LSU baseball back in action tonight at home against Northwestern State. Not going to spend an incredible amount of time previewing this game. Quite frankly, it's a game LSU can't lose. LSU cannot afford any more midweek losses. LSU has to do everything in their power in an attempt to boost their resume if they are going to make the NCAA tournament. Jay Johnson gave some injury updates on his coach's show last night. And based on those updates, I would say there's a good possibility Chris Stanfield will be able to play tonight. It'll be interesting to see if LSU elects to keep him out. I don't think Seth Dardar will play tonight. I think they will attempt to rest and rehab that ankle a little bit more and see if they can't get him ready for Friday. And Cooper Moore, Jay Johnson said Cooper Moore, LSU pitcher who's been down for the past 2+ weeks, could be available this weekend to pitch an inning or two if everything continues to progress well over the next several days. We'll certainly talk about that later in the week when we preview Texas A&M's visit to Alex Box Stadium. One of the things I wanted to talk about today in regards to LSU's baseball program, I wanted to go back in the season that they're having and sort of tie this in to some of the reporting that had been done recently, namely around Jay Johnson's complaints about the revenue sharing and complaints about, LSU's funding of the baseball program and being lumped in with those other Olympic sports. Verge Osberry gave a wide-ranging interview with Matt Moscona last week. He said him and Jay Johnson had met. They are going to fix it, and that LSU baseball is now going to get roughly 5% of the revenue share, and that will come largely at the expense of the other Olympic sports, and they will attempt to fund those Olympic sports through scholarships and out-of-state scholarships and NIL and other stuff, and not necessarily fund that through the revenue share. And one of the things that has sort of been loosely reported and sort of rumors, and it's sort of come out that maybe going as far back as last July and August, when the transfer portal was open and hot and heavy, that Jay maybe missed on a couple of guys due to money, and that he was unhappy then, he was unhappy with it around the first of the year, and that maybe some of that unhappiness wasn't met with the previous athletic director in the same way it has been met by Verge Osberry. Now, granted, Verge Osberry is now on the job during a season where LSU is not having a good year. Scott Woodward, of course, would have been listening to Jay Johnson coming off 2 national titles in 3 years, and I think Scott Woodward would have been more inclined, and I'm not reporting that this happened, but I think he would have been more inclined to just say, hey, Jay, figure it out. Now, allow me to editorialize for a minute here, because I do not know for sure that these are the 3 names, but there were 3 pitchers that I vividly remember LSU having an interest in out of the transfer portal who went elsewhere. One is Landon Mack. He's the transfer who ended up at Tennessee. He pitched well against LSU in that Friday night game. He's been Tennessee's Friday night starter most of the year. The second is Logan Redeman. Logan Redeman, I believe, was a transfer from Fresno or San Diego State, one of those California schools out there. He's at UCLA now. He would have been a big name, big money transfer. And the third guy, and I'm not sure that this was necessarily a money thing, but I know near the end of the portal cycle, LSU was interested in Joey Volchko. He was a Stanford transfer who has since ended up at Georgia, and he was in their weekend and has been in their weekend rotation. I think what you have seen here is, I don't want to use the term that LSU went bargain basement shopping in the transfer portal, because I don't believe that to be true. LSU's transfer portal class was ranked 5 or 6. by the multiple publications who rank those sorts of things in the offseason and the preseason. I think some of this just hasn't worked out. I think Cooper Moore was fine, but he got injured. I think that Santiago Garcia has been mostly fine. He maybe wasn't the impact reliever you thought he was. I think Trent Carraway was a miss. It's obvious Zach York was a miss. It feels like Braden Simpson. I don't want to say that one was a complete miss because I don't know that you expected him to hit 22 home runs and I don't know that you expected him to hit 389, but I think you expected maybe something out of him. And then Seth Dardar's probably the one that you look at alongside Zach York and say, it's probably more of a miss. I don't think Dardar's as big a miss as York, but I think Dardar's bat-to-ball skills and some of the approach maybe hasn't translated as well. So I think there's a little bit of a combination of things that has led to this. So the question I asked on yesterday's show was, if you go down LSU's roster, and we talked extensively about their roster in the preseason, what players on the roster are really exceeding expectations? And I would tell you that Derek Curiel has met the expectations. Certainly his expectations were through the roof, and he's been a great player. Jake Brown, we thought maybe could he lead the team in home runs? Could he hit 20 home runs? He's got whatever it is, 14 home runs now. I know he's had a couple of rough weekends, but he's met expectations. I think Stephen Milam defensively has met the expectations. You were probably hoping for more offense his junior year. I think Cade Arrambide, close in spots. Certainly we'll all remember the Tennessee game, but the defense hasn't been there. And up until the last couple of weekends, the consistency hasn't been there. Now, I think he's in a position here to help LSU's offense take off. And I think he's in a position, if he stays, to be one of the key cogs in his junior year. We mentioned all of the transfers. I think Chris Stanfield's injuries have, prevented him from really reaching, the expectations that you would have had for him. He's been fine, but it hasn't been, he's been tough as nails, don't get me wrong, and he's gritty and the glue guy on this team, and we all love Chris Stanfield. That's not what I mean. But, he's batting 265 and whatever. Just some of the numbers maybe haven't backed it up. Omar Cerna and Mason Braun, I would say, are getting close to where you might say they met the expectations. Certainly, I think we thought Zach York would be the first baseman, so we thought Braun would be in the mix at DH. We thought Cerna would be in the mix as the second catcher in the DH. But I think the struggles that they've had at times certainly opened the door for more people to play, right? And even with Zach York out of the way now, I do think, I say out of the way, out of the lineup anyway, I do think you're starting to see Mason Braun exert himself a little bit, maybe at first base, right? But that's really about it on the hitting side. And then a guy like Eddie Yaman's had some nice moments here, but the fact that Eddie Yaman is getting so much playing time lately, probably tells you everything you need to know about that. And then on the pitching side, it's tough because I don't think Kason Evans has met the expectations of a Friday night starter. I don't think Kason Evans has been bad, and I certainly think he's had his moments. And it's that exact reason why I brought up what I brought up about those pitchers. Because I think if LSU would have landed Landon Mack or Logan Redeman, or maybe even Volchko, I think one of them could have moved into the Friday night role. Evans would have moved to Saturday. William Schmidt probably would have stayed on Sunday. Maybe even Cooper Moore would have been, if Cooper Moore wasn't a direct replacement for one of those other guys. And I think it would have allowed maybe Kason Evans and William Schmidt to ease into the elevated roles that they both had. I think the misses on those pitchers in the transfer portal, whether it was money related or not, has caused some of those dominoes to fall. I also think it's just been a bad year. in terms of, I don't think Gavin Guidry's met expectations. Maverick Rizzi certainly hasn't met expectations. Grant Fontenot was talked up big as a setup man or a possible closer. Hasn't happened. I think by and large, Devin Sheeran has been pretty good, and I think he's given them kind of what they expected. Long story not short on this is LSU's pitching staff hasn't lived up to the expectations. Marcos Paz, I think by this point in the season, you were expecting him to be a factor. I think you were expecting Jaden Newt to have some kind of a role. He largely hasn't. I think you were hoping that maybe Reagan Ricken was going to be a midweek starter. That hasn't really happened. He started games, but he hasn't gone deep into games. He hasn't pitched really well since maybe that first outing way back, in late February. LSU hasn't thrown enough strikes. They haven't found enough roles for guys. They haven't been able to identify roles for guys in the bullpen because, quite frankly, it's just been a mess. And so I think when you look at everything in totality with 19 games remaining here, you say, okay, what is the goal? And the goal has to be to get in the NCAA tournament, right? And so the goal has to be, I think they need 8 more conference wins. I think 14 and 16 would get them safely in the field. And so that is something that will start this weekend with a home series against Texas A&M. Before we get out of here today, I do want to congratulate Flau'jae Johnson. She was the 8th pick in the WNBA draft last night by the Golden State Valkyries. She was then traded to the Seattle Storm, so she will begin her career in the Pacific Northwest in the WNBA. I also want to mention a bit of bad news out on the Ponderosa. Aiden Anding, one of LSU's reserve cornerbacks, who apparently had a really nice scrimmage on Saturday in Tiger Stadium with a couple of interceptions. He unfortunately tore his Achilles in that scrimmage, and he will be out for the year. On tomorrow's show, we're going to recap the LSU Northwestern State game, and I want to get into some spring football stuff, and there's a couple of interesting names in the women's basketball transfer portal that I want to get into as well. It was just announced a few minutes ago that Amara O'Neal, who is the daughter of Shaquille O'Neal and who started at Florida, is now in the transfer portal. I will be very curious to see if LSU gets involved. She fills a need. I know, that would be a tough thing for her to, try to maybe follow in the footsteps. But I wonder if there's some bridge that can be built there, and I wonder if Shaq could play a role there in getting her to LSU. But we'll talk all about that tomorrow. Enjoy the game tonight. LSU really needs a win. If you're asking me about a starting pitcher, I would start Jaden Newt. I think Jaden Newt's a candidate. Reagan Ricken's a candidate. Just about anybody would be a candidate as an opener. I would like to see Jaden Newt start and maybe see if they couldn't get 2 or 3 innings out of him and maybe get 50 or 60 pitches out of him and try to give some of these other guys a rest. But we'll see what Jay does. I do believe Stanfield will be in there. I believe Braun will be the first baseman, and I believe Braden Simpson will be the second baseman tonight. I don't think they will run Seth Dardar out there tonight. So enjoy the game. As always, be good to one another. Always boot up, and always, always, always go Tigers.